Warning, the following video has flashing lights and also includes content that may be deemed inappropriate for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Celeste and Mr. Barber, you both have decided to awaken me from my slumber as we do dive into another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on LordeStarfox Radio. I do see you brought me gifts as well. It is time for me to indulge. Absolutely a delicious. I could sit here all night and drink some B positive blood. Yet it is time for Celeste, Bigfoot's barber shop, and Starfox to again take a walk into the madness known as the Dogman phenomenon.
Stood up. I said, oh my god, it's a werewolf. And everybody in the car freaked out.
My creatures of the night. Again, you are tuning in to Midnight Lycanthropy. Celeste and Brian Barber, all of y'all have found your way into the Fox Den to sit around the late night fire as we again burn the timber into the early hours of the morning. Celeste, my friend, how are you doing tonight?
I am doing great. I appreciate to get to come on here and chat with you. And how are you doing?
Excellent. I appreciate the kind words. It's really good that Colleen, yes, linked us up. And to fully answer your question, busy, yet I am here. It's a good thing. Can't complain about opportunity.
Yes, it's very nice. And how are you, Brian?
Doing pretty good. Got clearance from the doctor to get back on the road to the bodybuilding show and start lifting again. So it's been, good news on that front. And it's a pleasure to meet you, Celeste. And I can't wait to hear more about what you do.
Celeste, since you're new here, what is it that really intrigues you in general? Can you tell the audience what you do per se? What has got your interest inside of the good old cryptid field? Mr. Barber's already told us a bunch of different times. He can update you a little bit, but I would love to hear how you got here.
Awesome. Well, I am part of Pocatello Paranormal. I am one of the mediums and psychics that works with the team. So I was born hearing voices and communication from entities and the other side that a lot of people cannot do. And so that is kind of what brought me into Pocatello Paranormal. And it's rather interesting. I've learned throughout time that some of the myths and the lore, they have to come from somewhere. And I am definitely a firm believer in anything is possible. I have friends who are part of the vampire community and part of the werewolf community. So that's always interesting to learn more about other people's feelings and experiences with that. As I said, I am a psychic medium, I am a healer, I do all kinds of work in the paranormal, the energy works, huge fan of the moon. So it's nice to meet and speak with like-minded people, sharing ideas, sharing experiences, because I have come to the reality that sometimes what's considered fantasy is not necessarily make believe. So that's kind of always been something I've been intrigued by.
That is beautiful stuff right there. Very interesting and intriguing. Thank you for sharing that with us. To the audience, of course, I had a gist of that throughout communicating with Celeste, yet now I am updated in the good old database upstairs like the rest of y'all. So this is a good kudos. Mr. Barber, what do you think about all that? And what the heck have you been up to, man? Anything with the good old Dogman or Werewolf, or what's good, man?
Well, the snow's finally melting, so I might be able to get out and start doing some Bigfooting again here really soon. Uh, it got a couple projects in the works as far as people wanting to go to certain locations and sit down for some interviews, and we'll see how that goes. But uh, always been interested in uh, psychics and especially mediumship. And I was wondering if, like, hopefully during this conversation, I know some people have certain rituals they go through to get ready in order to communicate. And I'm definitely a firm believer in it because I've experienced it firsthand where we'll say my dad self,
Hmm.
and just a few months ago, it'll be 20 years in May 21st, and carried guilt the whole time over certain things. And somebody, a good friend, I'll say her name because she's on the show. So Barb Hartman actually, uh, out of the blue, was telling me, and she was repeating conversations that my dad and I had that nobody knew about. And I mean nobody, because they were in a garage between him and I, and literally the day before he crossed over. And so we actually got answers to questions I had, and after that conversation had a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. And because everything she said made sense, where a lot of the paperwork and testimony I had heard from people, nothing really added up. But with everything Barb said, made sense, was because I found him, and made total sense with how that worked. So I definitely believe in it. And I know certain people do certain things mentally to prepare for it. So I'm always interested in hearing how they do that. So hopefully we can hear that from Celeste at some point. You've been doing it since you were born. Um,
Yeah.
did you come right out, or did somebody help you hone your skills, or self-taught?
Well, basically, it came naturally when I was young. I would be carrying on. For example, my mother, we were Catholic, and my mother was part of what was called Altar Society. So we'd spend time inside of the church. She'd be getting it ready for the next, weekend mass or cleaning or, switching books, whatever. And I would be in the back of the church lighting candles and having full on conversations at maybe 4 or 5 years old. And my mom would say, "Who are you talking to?" And I'd be like, "These people and the angels and God." And to me, they were literally there. Like you hear about children that have imaginary friends. Um, they weren't in my imagination, they were standing there with me. And so I never thought other people were different until I was about 12. And I had an experience where I was at the city park with some friends, and there was a strange looking man leaning against a tree staring at us. And it was kind of making me feel uneasy. And I said to one of my friends, "The guy over there by that tree is kind of creeping me out." And she's like, "What guy?" And I'm like, "The one by that tree." And she's like, "There's nobody by the tree." And it was like, "Oh, I'm just kidding. Ha ha ha." And then it was like, "Whoa, do I see things sometimes that other people don't see?" So this got kind of pushed down because I didn't want to be weird and I didn't want to be crazy or whatever, thoughts come through a 12 or 13-year-old person's brain. Um, as I got a little bit older, my empathy, which is where you feel literally what other people are feeling, whether it's physical pain, emotional pain, depression, any kind of emotion at all. And it caused me pretty severe depression when I was in high school. And so I kind of tried to stifle everything down. And we've all heard this story, I believe, of the little boy was sticking his finger in the dike to stop the leak, and eventually the dike gives way. Well, that's what happens when you have the bottle of soda and you shake it, but you don't take the lid off, and you shake it and you shake it, and eventually it explodes. So that's kind of what happened with me. And I found when I would hit places in my life that was confusing or I didn't fully understand, somebody would appear in my life and they would be like, "Oh, hey, have you ever heard of spirit guides?" Or, "Oh, hey, this, that, or the other. Have you used crystals? Have you learned how to ground?" And a lot of the things, the minute they mentioned what it was, I had this like knowing without actually being told or explained. And so that's kind of how my life has been. And now I work trying to help other people. It's a big time of awakening. A lot of people are getting sudden downloads of intuition or empathy or the ability to heal, maybe coming into feeling their other, like we talked about, vampire and werewolf and different things like that, and just helping people to understand what's happening. No, you're not crazy. Yes, your other people experience this too, that kind of thing. So it's just kind of been an ongoing process, one that gets pretty exciting sometimes, and usually not many dull moments.
So, because I recently learned about being an empath, somebody had told me, and I'd always been able to pick up on people's feelings and stuff like that. And I had a friend of mine who, as long as I've known her, has had not medium, but psychic abilities. And she's like, and I said, "Did you know?" And she's like, "Yeah, years ago, dummy." And so we chuckled, but what she ran into, and I heard you bring it up, was the fact of her faith.
Right.
Did your faith interfere was that part of the reason why you push things down? I know I'm being nosy, so if you don't want to answer,
No,
that's fine.
nope. I think our world is much better if we're open and honest about things, especially for people that are suffering in silence. And I say the word suffering, but when people are feeling alone or confused, I think it's important for other people to share. Um, my faith was very important to me. I am in my mid 50s now, but at age 37, I walked away from my religion because just my understanding, my abilities, different things like that, I was feeling conflicted with what I was told was the right thing or the wrong thing. And everything inside of me was like, no. And so there was this conflict of beliefs. And just with meditation, and because I can communicate with the other side, it was a situation where I had to go with what my heart, my gut, my soul told me was right, even if it conflicted with a religious practice or belief. And so I still love my religion. I have a huge collection of rosaries, um, still talk to the saints and the angels and all of that. But the human side of it has big flaws, which is part of being human. And some of those flaws just completely went against what I felt was morally or ethically correct. And so I commune directly myself now, which I kind of always did anyway. But a lot of people I'm meeting and running across are having similar things. There was a conflict in their religion, or there was a conflict in their family, or they've switched religions. And I don't know. I think it's important that people realize, just like picking out shoes. Some of us are comfortable in tennis shoes, and some of us are comfortable in stilettos and hiking boots and barefooted. And those options are viable options, and we have to find what fits. And sometimes it changes throughout our life. So that's kind of where I've been with it. Um, is that something you've ever encountered?
I try to talk to as many mediums as I can because I went through a religious issue when I was looking to get married, and I'd been divorced, had a kid, and going into the Catholic thing, how that
Mm-hmm.
was.
Yeah, that was one of my dilemmas.
So I began to doubt everything because in my mind at that point was certain things were written that people go by, but at the same time they weren't written by the other side, they were written by man. So how much influence did man put into what was written? Where
Exactly.
people with gifts like yourself actually have an inside line as to what's going on next. So to me, it's like I love being able to ask questions about it because it's like, okay, well, you kind of got a direct line to this point. So it's like, hearing how you handle things, and I know my friend went through a terrible time with her faith, and basically kicking her out of the church and the whole 9 yards. So
Yeah, I chose to exit before I was kicked out. And it was like, I feel like I'm a pretty moral and ethical kind of a person. And I know that that's based on everybody's judgment and opinions. But I grew up very devout. I was in choir. I taught religious ed to children, had been a follower since the day I was born, and had a person, because part of Pocatello Paranormal, we'll go in if a house has got activity that is causing chaos or disruption with the family. We'll go in and I'll clear the house. I'll remove the energy that's in there, or let them know, this is the land of the living and you can stay here if you stay here peacefully. But if you're bothering the children, or you're causing people to not feel well, or you're disrupting life, knocking things over, you're going to have to leave and I will escort you out, kind of a thing. And the person who owned the house at that particular time was also Catholic, and was in I don't know if it was a prayer group, a Bible study. She was in some type of activity and had mentioned that they had somebody coming in to do that. And she was told that if there was anything in her house that was not normal, it's because of her and it was her fault. And anyone who does that and isn't a priest is the devil. And the people that were saying that were the nuns that I had taught religious ed with. And that's the human opinion, that's the human judgment. And it's like, I thought in religion, judge not was what one of the golden rules. And so it was many things, but yes, the marriage thing was part of it. And I don't know, I've always had a very close relationship with the divine, and didn't need an in between, especially one that condemned me, not knowing it was me, I guess, and when they knew me in person, they knew I was a really good person. So it just, everybody has to find what works for them. But I completely can relate to what you're saying.
yeah, you talk about the in between, and one of the questions, and I'll tell you two quick stories how I actually got kicked out and asked never to come back. But the first one was, looking into this, I didn't understand the whole have to pray to Mary thing. And I had a client who was a Sunday school teacher for a church. And I says, so what's this? I thought you're supposed to have a one-on-one direct relationship with God, the whole thing like this through prayer. And he says, no, you got to pray through Mary because she's the conduit. I said, oh, and he happened to be on the leg press. So he'd only done 180 pounds at the most on that leg press for 10 reps. So I think it was 360 pounds on it. And he looked at me like, what the heck are you doing? I said, I want big legs. You're the conduit. So go to work. And he was not happy with that. But inquiring because of the whole looking to convert thing, I was asking questions, and I hate being told just because.
Yeah.
Which is, from everybody I've talked to, very common when it comes to, certain religions. It's just because. That's the way it is, just because. And finally, at one point, the minister, because I kept asking questions, because I wasn't going to convert just for the sake of doing it. I wanted to believe in my heart it was the right thing to do. Unfortunately, my mouth got me in the wrong spot because, he asked about total belief in the Bible, and I made a rant that I said, well, that was every part of the Bible was written, by 2 or 3 generations out. It wasn't even the actual people there. It was 2 or 3 generations out. These books were put together by other people. I said, where you got somebody like Buddha, who they wrote down every word as he said it, from his mouth. It wasn't hearsay. And at that point, the minister, he says, Mr. Barber, why don't you just go ahead and head out the door and don't come back? So,
Yeah. One of the other big conflicts, and I know that you will understand this as well, for people that leave early on their own doing, like you had spoken about, being told originally that there was a limbo and what happens. Well, I talk to people on the other side, and that isn't true. And so many people continue a faith or a belief based on a story or based on a human interpretation of things. And it's like, okay, I'm not infallible. I can be wrong, but I also can tell you that people go to a better place, whatever we want to call it. People go into the light, they go into peace, they go into a different kind of a dimension. It's not far away. Heaven is not on another planet or in a star or up in the sky. It's right here where we are. It just is through a veil, so to say, kind of a thing. And there isn't judgment as far as certain situations like we've talked about. And I have always kind of correlated that kind of crossing, and others go back and forth. And I believe the circumstances that lead up to that other situation are very similar. And for anybody or any religion to say every single situation is exactly the same is nearly impossible, if not completely inaccurate. And so I just felt for myself that not having the middleman telling me what you're thinking and feeling is wrong, but what this person said was right. So, it's an interesting thing, and I think that's what life is supposed to be about, is learning and getting new information and expanding knowledge and expanding experiences. And sometimes in religion, it's a box, and you have to fit in that box. Like you found out you didn't, and they're like, okay, out of the box, you don't fit in here. And it's like, okay, thank you. Thank you for helping me see that I probably didn't want to be in your box. So
well, I appreciate you reaffirming that too, because that was what actually set me off to really challenge this individual, was because I said, so what happens to somebody who's, a good person their whole life, and even toward the end of it get baptized? My dad was doing everything he could to save his marriage. He even got rebaptized and had been attending, and then he did what he did. I said, what happens to somebody like that? And they're like, no, fiery dates for him.
Yeah.
So I'm like, that didn't sit well.
No.
So that was when that was, let's see, would have been 23 years ago. No, sorry, 18 years ago. So I didn't have the wisdom to keep my mouth shut and just let it go.
Yeah, I am pretty mellow yellow for the most part, unless I know that what somebody is saying is the breeze. And it's like I have a hard time not responding as well. So, I think sometimes people, well, even the stories of Jesus, he rocked the boat all the time. He rocked the boat. He went into the temple and flipped the tables. I mean, we're not all supposed to be complacent and allow, just because this is how we've always done it doesn't mean that's how we're always supposed to keep doing it, and there needs to be people that have the strength or the conviction to go, I'm not sure that's completely accurate. And a lot of authority figures don't like that.
Yeah, and that's why I'm always admire and have the utmost respect for people with your gifts who are willing to not keep it to themselves because of fear of, public perception. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you for acknowledging that. I really appreciate it.
No, great stuff by both of you. I'm just sitting here listening and learning. I know very minimal about everything y'all spoke of. I am, a graphics designer, investigative photojournalist. The topics I cover, etc. Very interesting, intriguing stuff. And I was just trying to get my maniac squirrel, who now seemingly is asleep, also in the background. But again, great stuff by both of you for sure. I wanted to know, Celeste, do you feel that Dogman and Werewolves are definitely different as per se we feel over here, or do you think they are more closely connected per se than people understand? Do you feel the missing people in the national forest, that yes, Dogmen and Sasquatch per se are involved?
Well, that is a lot, but let's start at one end and we'll try to get through all of it. If I miss one of them, remind me. I live in an area where we are quote unquote on the former Native American ground. We have a reservation very close to where we are, where, they got scooched over and put in a box. We love those boxes. So on our reservation, I have several friends who have personally witnessed what they call Dogman. I don't know if all of the stories are exactly the same throughout different parts of the country, but here at this reservation, what my friends described as Dogman was literally a canine looking body. So your four legs, tail, fur, and from the back, it looked like the head of a dog as well. But when it turned and looked at you, it didn't have the face of a dog. It had the face of a man. And it is what is the word I want? It is not a good thing. It's bad juju when you see something like that and you're supposed to not bother it. And my friend had heard rustling out like the stray dogs were getting into her garbage cans, and she opened her door and was going to be like get whatever, trying to get it to leave, and it turned around and it was a face, not a dog. And so she immediately went back inside of her home, and she was telling me, and she goes, am I crazy, is this real? And I said, my intuition is pretty strong. And most of the time, what a lot of people deem as a fable or a superstition or, some sort of a fantasy type creature comes from somewhere. When you think about dragons, back in the day, quote unquote, when there were dragons, they had depictions throughout the world, in China, in Europe, all over, Romania. And how, without any ability really to communicate with each other, were these similar looking creatures, similar characteristics? I mean, some looked more serpenty, some more dinosaur-y, dragon, like lizardy shaped, but they all were very similar. And so I think that there is definitely a grain of truth, if not a lot of truth, to these different legends. The people that I know, um, that believe that they have werewolf spirit or werewolf gifts, some of them describe themselves transforming. They don't necessarily, like we see in the movies, believe that they suddenly grow fur, drop down on four legs, or whatever the different depictions are, but they believe it's an energy, a spirit, a shift in their, like, their senses heighten, and their just the normal human behavior dissipates, and the animal behavior, the instinct, the hunting, the um, just the ability to experience nature at a different level alters. So I kind of have a hard time not believing that, because I don't feel like I have anything like that within myself. but the moon affects me, and I see it affect a lot of people. I mean, that's where we get the word lunatic or lunacy, is people being affected by the moon. It moves our oceans. How does it not affect a human with all the water that we have in our brain or in our body makeup? How does it not shift us just like it shifts things in nature? So I think there's a great deal to be understood. And again, I don't necessarily think every single one is the same, because every person is not the same. Why would every other entity be the same? I'm trying to think some of the other ones. Oh, Bigfoot. I actually am also, in addition to Pocatello Paranormal, I am part of paranormal research and cryptozoology at the local university, which is Idaho State University here. And we have a club, and we explore the paranormal, and we explore all of the different creatures and elements of the legends, the myths, whatever people want to label things. And we have one of a very renowned professor here at ISU who has studied Bigfoot, and he's got the footprints, and he's written books, and he's been on documentaries. And there's people here in our town, in our area, that have seen them up in our mountains. I don't believe I've ever seen one. I think I've possibly smelt one or felt the energy, because, like I said, with my empathy abilities, I have a very high sense of energy shifts. And as far as missing people, here's a theory that I heard, and to me, it rang pretty true, in that they're not, like, for example, Bigfoot is not an animal. It is not a creature. It's kind of a interdimensional being that can shapeshift, like we hear of the shapeshifters and the different native traditions like that, that they can for example, I am also an ordained minister, and I married a couple that were park rangers here in this area. And she was talking about hearing weird sounds in the winter up in the mountains, and was following footprints that were a good stride and a half longer apart than a traditional humans would be. I mean, if you were like running, like stretching your legs as far as you could with each step, it would be like this similar track pattern. But all of a sudden it stopped. Like the tracks ended, and there was snow everywhere, and there were no more tracks in the middle of nowhere. There wasn't like a tree next to it, or anything that was like 10 to 15 feet to any kind of like tree or rock or anything that it could have leaped onto per se. And so she was one of the people that said, I think that they have some sort of supernatural power or ability to, I don't know, evaporate, go into a black hole, teleport, something like that. And so I kind of wonder if some of the missing people have had something like that happen to them, like they are teleported away. Because I've heard the stories of, like, they'll find their clothes and their shoes, but the person's gone. Or they'll find some sort of a clue that they had been there, but then they find them 50, 80 miles away in another area, and they're not sure how they got there. I don't know. I think there's a lot of possibilities in that, but I am a firm believer. Another friend was driving, and everybody thinks when you hear Bigfoot and they're banging on trees, or they're letting those screams out that you hear recorded on, TikToks and documentaries, that it's not necessarily a threatening to the human, but possibly a warning. Maybe there's a grizzly bear in the area. Maybe there's a tree that's about to fall over in the road, and they're trying to get your attention to keep you safe. And the reason with that is, I had a friend driving up more in northern Idaho, where we have a lot more forests, where we kind of hug into Montana, and he saw a Bigfoot run across the road. He said that's what he saw. It was night, everyone else was asleep, and he put on his brakes and he stopped and was like, oh my gosh, what did I just see? That whole mentally check yourself. If I lost my mind, did I fall asleep? And slowly started going. and about 20 feet down the road, a big tree was across the road. If he'd have been going the normal speed limit, he probably wouldn't have seen the tree soon enough to be able to stop. And so, I don't know. I'm curious what you guys think.
Wow. Really very interesting stuff right there. Again, thank you for sharing all of that excellent information. Brian, before I ask Celeste this next question, what do you think about all that?
Well, as most know, I'm definitely a firm knower in Bigfoot. That's kind of where I'm making my mark right now. I always thought it would be somehow doing with fitness after working in a gym for 40 years, but now I'm on YouTube forever being the peanut butter kid that fed Bigfoot 9 jars of peanut butter a week. So, yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer in Bigfoot as to what they are and what they do. Anything is on the table. I learned a long time ago not to draw any lines in the sand because every time I do, I got to erase it because too many people see shape shifting and I know there's quite a few people that see them walk out of portals, see them walk out of orbs of light. So who am I to say I'm right and they're wrong? I can't do that. Not with a good conscience anyway. You have to be very open on something that technically doesn't even exist yet, until we have a thing like Close Encounters of the first time where 4 Bigfoot will walk out of the woods and hand us a document of what they can do. We're not going to know until that happens. So, and the fact that Celeste is able to, with her abilities, if she's actually encountered any and been able to speak, because there's a whole lot of the mind speak that goes around. And I think I experienced it at one time with my first sighting.
Um, I was in Mount Shasta in 2017, and that is just its own portal, everything. It's an amazing place. I'd never been there before, and we were kind of hiking around in the trees. I personally didn't encounter it, but I would say if there are places that they would want to be or that they would most likely be, that is one of them. But I had friends and they felt like they were communicated with through telepathy. There was no sounds, there were no words, but they knew that they were safe because it was kind of startling. It was a bit of a distance away from them. And but you're walking along, you're talking, you're laughing, whatever in the forest, and you look up and you're like, whoa, is it a bear? That was their first thought. And this thing said no. And they're like communicating without realizing they're not speaking and realizing that they're hearing English words with a creature that's not human. And so 100% agree with like the telepathy type of communication. One of my very best friend's son lives up by Forks, Washington, kind of where the Twilight movies were filmed. And he has this place that he goes up into the mountains, and the Bigfoot come around him every time he's up there. Sometimes they'll show themselves, sometimes they'll just make their kind of like a clucking, clicking tongue thing in their mouth. Sometimes he'll get up in the morning and there'll be a handprint on the window of like his trailer. He'll see the footprints, but he said usually he smells them and will hear like the movement in the trees. So I don't know. I think it's just like anything else. It doesn't exist until we find it or until we, um, find physical proof of it. But I can tell you from my gifts and ability, physical proof doesn't come with everything that we experience or see or interact with. And so, um, yeah, who are we to say, oh, it doesn't exist or it only exists like this? And where we haven't really found remains, maybe it's because they bury like we do, or maybe because it is interdimensional and they teleport whatever, or maybe it doesn't pass. Maybe it's an eternal existence. Who knows? So, but I love talking to people about it because everybody does have kind of similar and different experiences. Is that kind of what you found, Brian?
Absolutely. You know, and even now that that I've gotten out a little bit more public with the experiences I've had, because it's been ongoing in one location for 4 years, and I know we want to keep that on another channel, but uh, I love going up to people now because people are a little more comfortable coming out with their stories. A few weeks ago, I saw a white truck that pulled up in front of me, and we happened to stop at the same store. So as soon as he got out, I ran up to him, and he kind of looked at me like I was going to mug him or something. But and I said, "So, do you believe?" And he goes, "Well, do you?" And I said, "Yeah, I look for him." And then he continues to tell me that his wife thinks he's nuts, but he had a story when he was fishing up in the backwoods of Canada. So when I see stickers on trucks, I go up and ask people, or if I hear it. I was in the hospital last week, laying there waiting to be seen, and this guy starts talking about, uh, out of the blue, he starts talking about a Bigfoot show and how he believes in it. So I went over and pulled my phone out. I said, "You mean they found tracks like these?" And he's like, "Are those yours? Did you find those?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Oh my!" And it put a smile on his face. He's the guy sitting there in pain with bodily fluid, red fluid coming down off his head. I don't know if we can say that, term on the air, but, and then I played some audio I'd gotten from him, like, me getting the crap scared out of me when they threw rocks at a sign. I was putting a tape recorder on, and some howls and some growls, and just made this guy's day. So,
Yeah,
I,
that with like Pocatello Paranormal, a lot of times when people would contact us and be concerned their house was haunted, and they'd be like, "Am I crazy?" And it's when you find somebody who not necessarily agrees with every single thing you say, but can validate, no, there's really something going on. You really did see something, and just that relief of maybe I'm not crazy. And I think it goes with any of these different types of creatures is when someone sees it and everybody else is like, that's not real. How much beer were you drinking? Or, things like that. It's like when you get that validation or that just the confidence of what you've said is true, that they're not being thought of lying or making up stories. I think it's really important to have that. So that's really great that you're able to do that.
yeah. And a question for you, Celeste, is, because I don't take reports and investigate them. All my stuff is solo. I just run up and talk to people if I think they've had an encounter, just to hear it. Being that you do actual investigations, be it cryptids or paranormal, have you ever had anybody deliberately try to hoax you, or you thought was just bat crap crazy?
We absolutely have ran into people that should be medicated, literally, or had been and have quit, or have partaken in substances that have created illusions, delusions, whatever words you want to use. That absolutely exists, and I think that contributes to a lot of people going, "Oh, it's just a bunch of bunk." They went up around the campfire and roasted too many s'mores or whatever, but that's not very common. That's not even probably 10%. And so, I think it's important to hear people's stories. But yeah, definitely with the empathy. Like I would look at Colleen and be like, eyebrows raised. I'm, yeah, not so sure that I'm buying what they're trying to sell. And, but like I said, that's not the majority of people. And it's hard to say that the ones who are making stuff up or trying to, um, take you on a goose chase haven't had something maybe in the past that, instead of being honest about what they really did experience, they want to exaggerate it or enhance it, kind of a thing. So I don't know. I think that's sometimes human nature, but I think there's a lot of people that are becoming more sensitive, becoming, um, more noticing of their environment or feeling things that are around them that maybe you can't see per se with your eye, but you feel it, like the hairs that stick up on the back of your neck, or the goosebumps that come out, or just that little shiver that runs down your spine for no apparent reason, no visible reason. It would be foolish to go, oh, what a coincidence. I am a big believer that most things are not a coincidence. Most things are something that's happening, something that's shifting, and we've sensed it, kind of a thing. So, have you had that happen? Have you had the, um, you can't necessarily see it, but you feel it kind of a thing?
I was just going to ask you the same thing because there's times when I talk to people where it just seems absolutely, believable. They come across believable, but then there's something about me that's like, this person's more full of crap than a outhouse at a campground, even though everything seems credible. So, and I thought, man, I wonder if somebody with abilities gets that same thing where somebody just seems, completely sane, sounds great, and you're like, there, there's something off with this, or vice versa, where somebody sounds just like a raving lunatic, but that voice says, you know what, I think something happened. Because I often wonder with people, are they crazy before it happened, or did they turn crazy because it happened?
Yeah, exactly. Well, like I say, being a psychic for the most part, I don't usually call people out if they're not telling the truth. I just kind of, whatever, okay, yeah, uh-huh. But one of the ways that I describe it, for me, for example, if you're walking through the woods and you suddenly smell an outhouse, that's how a lie comes across to me. You're just like, something doesn't smell quite right here. And but yeah, I completely can understand that concept, because I've experienced things where it's like, am I losing my mind? Have I gone off the edge? Did I not get enough sleep last night? But there really was something going on. And then other times where, no, that's nothing, but then you realize, oh yeah, that kind of was. So, it's that, which came first, the chicken or the egg. And I think sometimes it can go both ways. So definitely something to keep in mind when you're talking to people.
Yeah, because when my family had a Dogman experience way before I was born, back in, I think it was 64, and they had that experience in Nuevo and they moved. And when they moved to Benzie County, it was like 2 years later. And guess what? The property they're on, Bigfoot everywhere.
Yeah.
So when I was growing up, Bigfoot wasn't a foreign topic. It wasn't, it was like, well, just don't go in those woods because that's where Bigfoot lives. And so I think the Dogman kind of numbed them to it, because I didn't realize Bigfoot wasn't, because the show In Search of, and I know a lot of people say this, when they first aired the Patterson Gimlin film, I pointed to the DV and I said, Dad, is that what's at Grandma's? And he's like, well, not that one, but yes, that's what's out there. So it was like, I didn't know Bigfoot wasn't recognized until probably like fifth or sixth grade. And I saw books on, cryptids. And I'm like, what do you mean doesn't exist? It's at my grandma's house.
Yeah, that's funny. And like where I was kind of talking about dragons earlier, um, someone I know the other day said something, and it was like, there could be a grain of truth to that. And it's like, well, we never found the remains of dragons, or did we? Pterodactyls or dinosaurs, were they really what we thought they were? Could they have been a form of a dragon? It's like, we don't know things till we learn things, and we learn and discover new things all the time. And so I think it's important that we, like, at least listen to people's experiences, whether they're bunk or they're fact, and just kind of put the pieces together. It's like getting that 5,000 piece puzzle, and it just looks like a big box of pieces when you start, but then as you start putting it together and fitting things together, something forms, an image forms. And I think that's kind of this whole gambit of the myths and the legends. Is it really just a story, or is there some more to it?
And using your analogy, to me, that's kind of where the Dogman and Bigfoot, you would actually have to have two 5,000 pieces and then throw them all
Yes,
together,
exactly.
because and figure out which one goes in which picture because they overlap so much.
Mm-hmm.
And this,
Well, so with your knowledge, experience, whatever, talking to other people, do you think that, we'll start with Dogman, is always like that, or is it a type of a shapeshifter?
with the people I've talked to,
Or your
and
own personal, yeah.
yeah, my family only got a quick glimpse of it, and it was on 2 feet,
Mm-hmm.
and it was foggy, so they who knows if it dropped to all fours when it ran off or what. Um, I tend to think Dogman's a tough one for me because I do believe in them. It's just trying to categorize them because I hear so many of them talk about when they go from bipedal, from quadruped to bipedal, about the hips cracking, and so you try to, as bad as it sounds, you try to figure out in a human mind what that is. Is that even though it's could be shape shifting possibly, because I've been in a gym so long, to me it's like, how would that work on a normal person, with the hips rotate in, and that's what you hear pop in and out or things like that. And it always seems to me, I haven't heard of anybody with a good Dogman experience. They always talk about the glowing yellow or glowing red eyes and how they seem to taunt them and enjoy scaring the bejesus out of them, where Bigfoot, they tend to get both. You might hear the casual sighting, then you might hear where things really go south with that Teddy Roosevelt story about the Bauman incident, relieving one of those trappers of their breath. And then there's other times when you hear about like a guy that had property and there were people coming on and doing illegal activities, came up and threatened him. And next thing they knew, there was a 10-foot Bigfoot that got in between them and growled and chased them off.
Yeah.
So that, to me, for my opinion, it seems like the Dogmen are just the nasty ones. They're like the bully of the group. And then Bigfoot are individuals that even a good Bigfoot on a bad day can be a really bad day for a good person.
Yeah.
How about you, Star Fox? Where do you fall into this?
Well, I think that's all absolutely brilliant stuff by both of you for sure. And thanks for sharing that great knowledge that everyone should be seeping in, especially filling up the good old filing cabinet upstairs, right? Sometimes you got to clear the cache, other times you got to fill it up. Well, long story short, as we are wrapping this up here, I definitely think there's a big difference. If anyone does really want to hear the in-depth parts of that, I've spoken about it before in a bunch of different episodes, so to the audience, you can hear it in previous content. I think werewolves, skinwalkers, changelings, etc., are more, witchcraft based and could be put into the pot of paranormal, yet they are all definitely different as well. I'm just using that as a broad term, whereas I do feel, in my personal opinion, that dogmen are some sort of either misidentified known animal that did exist, whether it's giant baboons like the Dinopithecus or giant apes like the Theropithecus or cave hyenas, short-faced cave bears, dire wolves. I mean, yes, anything along the lines of that, or also it might even be an unknown species that we haven't fully verified yet. But I think there's a lot going on into that whole pot that we just spoke of. But that's my quick little broad thesis on the topic that you just presented me. I do appreciate the question. Definitely forces the brain to get taken in the right direction. Yet, I do know both of you beautiful minds are extremely busy. Is there anything else you would like to touch base on tonight before we let you both get rolling?
I wanted to thank Celeste for coming on because it's been absolutely my pleasure and fascinating. I hope we can chat more at some point because it's such an incredible story, and sounds like just a sincere individual who really wants to, help people understand things and not think they're crazy. And if they do have paranormal trouble, helping them when nobody else will is, talk about, I know the risks, when you get attachments and things like that. So the fact she's willing to put herself out there to do that, it's really commendable.
Thank you. And one of the things I wanted to throw out there too is it's really important for all of us to be like you guys are helping too, whether you acknowledge it or not, because there are people that are genuinely afraid or genuinely concerned about their sanity. And just to be able to have a safe person or a safe situation to go, okay, so let me throw this, out into the center of the circle and see what everyone thinks. I think it's really important, and there's a big shift right now going on in our world, in our universe. And that veil of reality versus fantasy is kind of um, shifting and changing a little bit, and people are becoming more aware of things that, were quote unquote not real, potentially or possibly being real. So I think I would love to talk more. Another time would be great, but I think broadcasts like this are so important. Yeah, there's some people that would just listen to it for entertainment or something to laugh at, but there's a lot of people that it might actually, be life altering to them. I am not crazy, or somebody else saw something like that, or, experienced it. And I think it really is a vital part of, reassuring people or helping them. Like, for example, in haunted houses, I often will say, well, do you ever tell them to stop? What? It's a ghost. What do you mean? I'm like, if your neighbor came over at 3 o'clock in the morning and started banging your door, open and close and slamming your door, would you just let him do it? Or would you be like, go home, Jim? Leave me alone. We're trying to sleep. But it's not a real person. Well, most ghosts used to be, and this is your house. So, but some people never think to do that. And I think that's in all of these different scenarios. It can be similar, and just kind of getting that camaraderie, if nothing else, of experiences or information to help learn and understand something that's scary or not familiar.
I love it. And I actually never thought of just telling something to stop like you
Yeah.
would talk to a normal person. That's
Yeah. That's usually the reaction I get, is like, what? It's like, yeah, tell them, do not wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Talk to me tomorrow when I've had my coffee. And they're like looking at you like you're, whoa.
Absolutely legendary stuff by both of you. And again, thank you for sitting down with us tonight. A big kudos to the audience. Yes, as stated, though, both of these individuals are very busy and do have other things to attend to. Yet, no worries. The links will be up in the good old description as how you can keep track of what Celeste is up to, as well as Mr. Barber. Mr. Barber is a bi-weekly, wait, no, time out, is a weekly host that comes on all the time. So you will hear from him very soon, and we will try to get Celeste back on as well when she gets a little bit of time. I have something very interesting for everybody that I will be covering within, well, I'd like to say a week or so, that involves Turner, Maine, back in the good old 2006 time. I will be sitting down with the cryptid huntress, Jessica Jones, and we will be speaking about something I have been able to dive into since I am up in the good old Maine area, and actually probably only a half hour or so away from Turner. Yet
Wow.
this will be the conclusion for the early hours of the morning. The Midnight Society did achieve a lot, as we always do. Thank you for hanging out with us tonight, Celeste, and the same to you, Mr. Barber.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure.
My pleasure, and it was very nice to chat with you, Celeste.
Thank you. You as well.
Ooh, you legends, you I do adore every single one of you. And thank you for hanging out with us tonight. Please like, comment, subscribe, feed the algorithm. We will catch you very soon.